Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition. We're going to talk about Gary Gygax and Meatloaf and Fallow years. Okay, so Meatloaf just died. I think some of you may know Meatloaf as a musician. I don't know Meatloaf as a musician. I know Meatloaf from Fight Club. Fight Club is one of my favorite movies in the whole world. It's probably my favorite non-genre film. In that, it's not actually it's not. When I say genre, most people understand that today as science fiction or fantasy. Like that's used kind of as a catch-all term for sci-fi fantasy together. Is called genre. But Fight Club is one of my favorite movies. I think there's a lot of wisdom in it. I think it's a really special film. And Meatloaf was in Fight Club, and Fight Club is really special to me, which means Meatloaf was really special to me, right? But just from his acting in that one movie. That's the only thing I know Meatloaf from, right? Now, I also understand he was like a musician, and he had an album called Bat Out of Hell, and it sold a lot of copies. And so I kind of think Meatloaf was, before I knew him as like an actor in Fight Club, he was like a poor man's Ozzy Osbourne, right? So he just died, and I've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about, of course, thinking about Gary Gygax. And so Gary Gygax's life goes in the following structure. Everything before D&D, 1974 D&D, then there's 12 years of furious creation, right? And it's Hollywood, and it's, writing, and it's, business, right? And it's just 12 years of furious setting up Dungeons & Dragons for the future, right? But then in 1986, he ends up leaving TSR, and then you have this period between 1986 and 2008, okay, which is 22 years left in his life after he leaves Dungeons & Dragons. And these are kind of like fallow years. So Meatloaf was a famous musician. Then that period was done, and then he moved into being an actor in movies and in television, right? And honestly, the work he did in Fight Club, I think Fight Club is a forever film, right? Like it's going to be a watched 100 years from now, right? And Meatloaf's going to be right in there. It's like, so this was a significant thing that he produced, right? Gary Gygax, he has everything that builds up to making him the person that can make Dungeons and Dragons, this super special thing that is going to radiate human improvement for the next 200 years, maybe 400 years, in my humble opinion, right? Maybe a millennium, and so basically, then he has 74 to 86, and then he has 86 to 2008, right? 22 more years where he does jack all and nothing, right? Gary Gygax, right? He didn't have a Fight Club, right? Meatloaf hit it big, did a great job as a musician, and then he landed in this absolute classic, modern classic film, Fight Club, right? And so he has something else that other people can know him for, right? But Gary only had the one thing. He just had Dungeons and Dragons, right? And then at that point, he spends the rest of his 22 years, right? And he dies being known for creating Dungeons and Dragons. So what did he do in those fallow years, right? Between 86 and 22, right? Now the reality is, I think he did some other projects, but none of them worked, right? They just didn't really go anywhere, right? Now I think that's a deep topic, but I think so if you look what happened in the last 22 years of Gary's life, and I think the real answer there is two things. I think it's family. I think he spent a lot of time with his family, and also people in the industry, people in the tabletop gaming industry that he personally dealt with, right? And that he encouraged, and that gave him some support as well, right? So the biggest thing is, I think more than anything, Gary Gygax, in those 22 years, spent time with his family, and spent time encouraging people in the tabletop role-playing game community, and just positioning people to serve in that industry, right? And that's not a small thing. That's not a small thing at all. Like, basically, sometimes we hit this point in our life where epic scale tasks are done, and becomes these small menial tasks, right? But I also, so from Gary's perspective, his world shrank from these, from this world breaking Dungeons and Dragons 12 years of frenzy into, let me spend time with family, let me encourage people who are in this industry that I created, right? And just be here, all right? And with Meatloaf, right? And I think Gary was hoping that there would be kind of a Fight Club moment, right? Like, where something circled around and he was able to to do something else. The other thing, and this is sad, sometimes your death, especially when you're a celebrity, turns out to be a booster rocket on something else. And I think Gary's death very much became a booster rocket on Dungeons and Dragons. And, of course, now the most beautiful thing that Gary is responsible for is Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, right? And hopefully 6th edition will be even better, right? But right now, 5th edition is the best version that's ever been born, and it is birthed from Gary's legacy, not from his actual work, but from his legacy. And I think his legacy shines way brighter than his actual work ever did. And that, I think, is the same for Meatloaf, right? Like, so I never knew Meatloaf's music, right? But he is really special to me from the work he did in Fight Club, right? So one of the things is, just as we are getting older, we should be looking for this. Like, we may have a smaller, more shrunk life where we're dealing with family and we're dealing with the people who are around us, right? And there's important work to be done there. Or we may have a second strike, right? Like, like just something really, like a huge spark, right? And that's what Meatloaf's Fight Club performance was. It was this huge spark that came later in life, right? So we should be very aware of what do we do with our fallow years, right? And understanding that sometimes, you grow something on a field and then you need to let that field sit and it needs to do nothing. And we shouldn't be disturbed by fallow years, right? And then also, what is our legacy? If we're really going to learn from Gary, what is the legacy we're going to leave, right? And we should make sure it's epic. Gary showed us that. Well, that's my opinion. Love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.